Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Lethbridge's Summer Festival Whoop Up Days is returning. We will tell you when and what you can expect this year. Another heat warning has been issued for our region. We speak with a doctor about how to best protect yourself from heat exhaustion and heat stroke. And a one-on-one conversation with a residential school survivor who lets us know her thoughts when it comes to recent attacks on Canadian churches.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Southern Albertans received some exciting news today. Whoop Up Days is set to return this summer. The celebrations and festivities are set to kick off September 2nd through the 5th. As Carson Marsouk reports now, even though the event is moving forward, it'll look just a little bit different.
With the announcement of Whoop Up Days returning to Lethbridge this summer, there are some changes to make note of.
The city wanted this level of celebration. Obviously, there's been some successes up the road this week in Calgary, and we wanted to ensure that we could have that same level of celebration in this community.
The Midway has switched from West Coast amusements to Wild Rose shows.
Unfortunately, the Midway is expected to be smaller this year due to the ongoing construction of the new Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center happening on the exhibition grounds.
The popular Whoop Up Days parade has also been cancelled this year due to cost, scheduling, and construction.
We wanted to make sure that the parade could be that same experience for the people of Lethbridge that it would normally be. So as I say, we look forward to welcoming the parade back in 2022.
Unlike certain events taking place at the Calgary Stampede, at this time you will not have to produce proof of vaccination or a negative COVID-19 test to enter.
We also know that there are a lot of people in the greater community that have had a tough couple of years, which is why this year Whoop Up Days will have free admission for people to attend.
There will also be food trucks, a marketplace, and live music, which is set to take the stage inside Heritage Hall. As for the rodeo, it has been postponed until next year. However, the Rocky Mountain Turf Club has added to the festivities as it kicks off the fall meet on Sunday, September 5th. This year's Whoop Up Days runs on September 2nd from 4 to 11 p.m. and September 3rd and 4th from noon until midnight. For Bridge City News, I'm Carson Marsouk.
The village of Sterling is welcoming everyone back to enjoy Settler Days this weekend. The mayor of Sterling, Trevor Lewington, says there should be many fun activities for the entire family to enjoy.
Tonight, we've got lots of activities. We've got a family pickleball tournament. We've got a slow pitch tournament going on, so lots of sport-related activities. Our friends at Hickory Street are doing a mac and cheese cook-offs. Our fire department's got an extrication demo, so people will be able to see how our volunteer fire department would deal with a multi-vehicle crash. There's a cakewalk for the kids, wagon rides, and then tonight's big conclusion is Movie in the Park. So Jumanji, the next level, will be on the big 40-foot screen in one of our baseball diamonds. So tonight's pretty jam-packed, and then tomorrow kicks off bright and early at 7 a.m. with our toonie pancake breakfast. So again, our fire department will be cooking for everyone who wishes to attend. We've got a parade at 11, continued slow pitch tournament in pickleball and other sports in the afternoon. Lots of activities and games for the kids.
Settler Days will wrap up with a massive fireworks display on Saturday night. Lethbridge police are investigating a number of suspicious fires on the south side, including a fire in the coulees earlier today. Police were alerted to the grass fire between Scenic Drive and 7th Avenue South around 4 a.m. Fire crews were called out and were able to put out the blaze before it could spread to nearby homes. Emergency officials were also called out to another grass fire on Thursday east of 43rd Street near 20th Avenue South. Officials say there were several other fires in the area which were believed to have started within a short time span. If you have any information that can help police with their investigation, call the LPS at 403-328-4444. Another heat warning has been issued for our region from Environment Canada. The 30-plus degree temperatures will continue for at least another week. Dr. Mila Luchak is a doctor with the AHS South Zone, and she has some tips now on how to keep cool, plus the warning signs when it comes to heat exhaustion and heat stroke.
Heat-related illness has a number of symptoms that people should watch for, and it may range from having a heat rash to heat cramps in the muscles or even swollen hands and feet. But that could progress to something called heat exhaustion or heat stroke. And heat exhaustion would be where someone may be sweating profusely, they may have some nausea or vomiting. But when it gets to something as far as heat stroke, that would be a medical emergency.
Dr. Luchak will have more ways on how you can protect yourself during the hot summer months coming up later in our broadcast. You may have noticed a smoky haziness which has made its way to our city. A lot of the smoke has been attributed to the wildfires currently burning in British Columbia and Washington State. Environment Canada has issued a special air quality statement for our region with our air at moderate to high risk. Health officials say when the air quality index is 4 or moderate, we should reduce strenuous activities outdoors, and if you have asthma or other respiratory illnesses, you should limit your time outdoors as well. Other areas of the province, including Calgary and Red Deer, are even worse with their air quality reading of 9 and 10, which is considered high risk. The BC Wildfire Service says it is being forced to focus on wildfires that threaten lives and safety due to a lack of resources. Officials say issues like hot weather are affecting firefighting partners in other provinces, which means there are fewer resources to share. Emergency Management BC says there are more than 300 wildfires burning across the province. Most are located in the Caribou, Prince George, and Kamloops regions, some in the Okanagan Valley as well. Close to 3,000 people have already been evacuated from their homes. Sarah Hall of the Fire Service says there are around 51 evacuation alerts in place affecting 10,000 properties in British Columbia. Jacqueline Wootall is a meteorologist with the Weather Network in Vernon, British Columbia. Jacqueline, how bad are the wildfires where you are in the North Okanagan? Are you on evacuation alert?
No evacuation alerts that I'm aware of right here in Vernon, although there was a fire about a week ago that got really close to a friend of mine that lives on Commonage Road, and that was pretty close to the city. As far as the overall fires in the Okanagan, we're not doing too bad. We've got the one near Okanagan Falls down through Skaha Lake, south of Penticton. That one's been out of control and is producing a lot of smoke. We did have a fire, I guess, in around the Coldstream area as of late, probably within the last week. That was producing some smoke. They got that one under control. So, I mean, the bulk of the fires have been north of the Okanagan up through the Thompson-Nicola region. And of course, you know, there's 308 fires burning province-wide right now. So even if there isn't a fire right near you, well, then you're dealing with the smoke for, you know, weeks on end, it seems, from all the other fires. Just how poor is the air quality where you are located? Well, surprisingly, when I got up today on Friday morning, it was actually perfect. Bright blue sky. And I don't know exactly why. My guess is there's an upper level low that's moving through the western parts of the province, and that southwesterly wind was enough to take that smoke and blow it out of the Okanagan. However, last night, Thursday night, when I went to bed, it was at 10 plus, the air quality health index, which is the highest on the scale. And you could feel it. You know, my husband has some breathing issues, so he was really starting to feel it after, I would say, probably over 2 weeks of smoky, hazy, you know, that tobacco colored sky that envelops the Okanagan Valley in particular in the summer. Any reprieve from the hot temperatures? Is there any rain in the forecast? There's a slight chance of like 1 millimeter of rain. I just noticed on our Weather Network forecast on our app today for Vernon proper. But in general, the central and northern parts of the province, they're going to see that same upper level low I was talking about, bring in some cloud and even some beneficial rain. But where we really need it is in the interior, and we're not looking at any shift in this pattern for weeks on end. So we're looking at, you know, between 30 and 35 degrees Celsius for much of the Okanagan Valley and much of the southeastern parts of BC over the next 2 weeks with not a drop of rain. There's really been this ridge of high pressure that's been locked into place. And I know that you in the prairies have been feeling a lot of heat as well. That's going to continue for Saskatchewan and Manitoba next. But we're still really hot in Southeast BC, so no break from this. And that's really what we could use right about now. Thanks so much, Jacqueline. That was Weather Network meteorologist and storm chaser Jacqueline Wootall joining us from Vernon, BC. A First Nations group in British Columbia is mapping a path to bring peace after releasing more details about some of the 200 unmarked graves at the former Kamloops residential school site. Chief Roseanne Casimir thanks survivors of the residential school system, saying they were unrelenting in carrying the truth about missing children. She says now the governments must step up to help in identifying many of those missing kids.
A critical first aspect to achieving those burdens is full and complete disclosure of the records held by the Canadian government and the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, specifically the student attendance records that were created by the institutions that were administered the Kamloops Indian Residential School. Those primary documents currently within the custody of the Canadian government will be of critical importance to identify those lost children. We're calling upon both the federal and the provincial governments to provide immediate and ongoing funding and supports to Tecumseh as we develop and implement frameworks and processes to further identify, document, maintain, and protect the remains of the children found buried at the Kamloops Indian Residential School.
A former residential school survivor and a victim of the 60s scoop says when it comes to the tragedy of the residential schools, the federal government needs to take more responsibility. Deborah Manous, who is president of the Shekinah Aboriginal Society, says all of the blame should not be placed on the church.
Well, there is so much, being focused on the church. And there was, within the Constitution and in the Indian Act at the time that they made up, that they were to go after the children and take them away from the homes. Now, this was all drawn up by the Canadian government. It wasn't made up by the church. So I really believe that, there needs to be more responsibility taken by the Canadian government.
Deborah Manous will also discuss the similarities and differences between Indigenous spiritualism and the Christian faith. That's coming up later in our broadcast. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says $27 million promised to help Indigenous communities identify unmarked graves is just the beginning. Trudeau says that reconciliation will take time and that his government will do more to support Indigenous communities dealing with the legacy of residential schools.
The memories and the pain that has been triggered by the discovery of these graves is significant, but it's also been a moment for all Canadians to understand that this is our shared history, but it's also part of our present, that the inequities and the challenges faced by Indigenous Canadians are a direct result of decisions we took as governments and as institutions many decades ago. That's why I told the chief from Kamloops that we would be there to support as necessary. The $27 million we set forward was an initial funding. There will be more funding as necessary to continue to allow communities to grieve, to heal, and to get answers. And at the same time, we have also committed over many years, and we will continue to recommit to sharing any and all records that the federal government has on helping identify these graves.
Negotiations continue between Alberta Health Services and the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees. The province's AUPE is asking AHS for a 5% increase in salaries over the next couple of years, which would represent a $105 million increase. This follows a demand for a 4% increase over 2 years by the United Nurses of Alberta. Conversely, the province says it is offering a one-time wage reduction of around 5%, along with job security to employees. Finance Minister Travis Taves says he is confident both parties can work together to reach a fair and equitable settlement that respects the fiscal situation of the province. With the Alberta United Conservative Government replacing the long-standing master agreement with the province's doctors, the new rules have had some unintended consequences, namely doctors leaving the province or choosing early retirement. Retired Alberta surgeon Dennis Maudry suggests the Alberta wages for medical staff are fair, and it is the inefficiencies which need to be targeted.
Let me say at the outset, physicians are not overpaid at all in any stretch of the imagination. But the system, the way the system operates, is very expensive to the taxpayer. And there are tremendous opportunities to improve access to the system, improve or maintain, at least maintain quality and reduce costs. But at the same time, maintaining fair and appropriate wages for not just physicians and surgeons, but also the nurses as well. The nurses are not overpaid, for example. But the system, the way the system operates, is so inefficient, and there are inefficiencies at every level.
Maudry says the province has the potential right now to challenge the status quo when it comes to health care and making it more efficient for Albertans. When exploring downtown Lethbridge, you may start to stumble upon a few new art murals located in the back alleys. The new murals are part of a new initiative to give local artists a place to present their work while revitalizing the city. The project is in collaboration between the City of Lethbridge and the Heart of Our City. The first mural to go up is located just off of 4th Avenue South behind the Penny Coffee House.
One thing that's really important about the Northern Flicker is it'll make its home and nest pretty much anywhere. Like, it's a hole dweller for sure, but it doesn't necessarily have to make the hole. It'll accommodate with whatever space it has. And so I thought that was a really good highlight. Not only is it here year round, but also it'll make its home anywhere and everywhere. And I think what a lot of people ignore is that that's happening in the backs of their streets. And so instead of putting up a higher fence or looking the other way, this is kind of highlighting that this is people's homes. This is part of like their livelihood.
Pilot project is funded jointly by the city's public art program and the Heart of Our City committee. It's a pilot, so it's exploratory, and in the pilot we've been able to fund 9 murals that will be installed over the course of the next 6 months all over the city of Lethbridge.
Over 200 cans of spray paint were used to create the mural. The artistic pieces can be seen throughout downtown and the city. Children aged 5 to 17 laced up their shoes and put their game faces on for a rugby clinic in Lethbridge today. As Micah Quinn explains, organizers say it was nice to be able to get back onto the field after the pandemic shut down many sports.
Savannah Collison is a University of Lethbridge Pronghorns rugby player, and she also works for the Alberta Junior Rugby Association. The association's goal is to provide resources for clubs throughout Alberta to have junior and rookie rugby programs.
Kind of get their hands on a ball. We're going to do fun games, we're going to do drills, we're just kind of do a bunch of things that get the youth and anyone who's interested involved in rugby.
Kids are encouraged to come down, regardless if they have experience in rugby or not.
And basically what we're trying to do is increase an earlier interest and awareness to rugby. Because I know a lot, like me personally, and a lot of my friends didn't even know about rugby until high school. So we're trying to change that and kind of give people the opportunity to become invested in rugby at a younger age.
Collison says last week the group went to Tabor, where over 70 kids showed up.
And then in August, we're looking to have a large Try It Day event in Lethbridge, and hopefully we can get people from those towns to come into Lethbridge so that it can have an even larger turnout than we've had so far.
The event will take place today at the Lethbridge Rugby Club from 3 to 6 p.m. The 5 to 14-year-olds will go from 3 to 4:30 p.m., and the 15 to 17-year-olds will play from 4:30 to 6 p.m. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
More images are coming in from the devastating tornado which tore through Barrie, Ontario on Thursday. Cleanup efforts have begun after the twister damaged around 25 homes and left at least 11 people injured. Environment Canada gave the tornado a preliminary rating of EF2, meaning it had the maximum wind speeds of 210 kilometers an hour. Now, this isn't the first time a twister hit the southern Ontario city. Another tornado hit Barrie back in 1985, which left 8 people dead and more than 100 people injured. Los Angeles County residents will once again be required to wear masks indoors, regardless of their vaccination status, beginning on Saturday night. The announcements from health officials came as COVID-19 cases have begun spiking once again in California.
This daily increase in cases, so the high level where we are now, puts us in the category of substantial community transmission of COVID-19. And considering that we've reported over 1,000 new cases a day over the last 7 days, this average case rate is at a substantial community transmission level, even without a 7-day lag.
I don't wear it right now because it's not mandatory, but if they make it mandatory, I don't mind wearing it. It's not.
Exactly.
It's nothing to be getting mad over about. You can act about all those people that get mad over just being asked to wear masks. It's just a mask. It's like other people smoke and do that. That's a respiratory whatever. You can't wear a mask. It's ridiculous.
I don't have a problem with that. I've been wearing it no matter that I'm vaccinated. I'm still wearing it.
The Tokyo Summer Olympics are just around the corner. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on all warring parties to observe the traditional Olympic truce during the upcoming Games.
In a few days, athletes from around the world will come together in Japan for the Olympic and Paralympic Games. They've had to overcome enormous obstacles to participate in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. We need to show the same strength and solidarity in our efforts to bring peace to our world. The Olympic truce is a traditional call to silence the guns while the games proceed. People and nations can build on this temporary respite to establish lasting ceasefires and find paths towards sustainable peace. Seeking peace and uniting around common goals is even more important this year as we strive to end the pandemic and build a strong, sustainable and inclusive global recovery. I call on all parties to conflict to observe the Olympic truce during the Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games and to build on it in the weeks and months ahead.
It was another hot, smoky day here in the city. Environment Canada not only issued another heat warning for our region, but also an air quality statement due to the wildfire smoke making its way here from BC. We'll have more details coming up after the break. Quite a bit of smoke from the BC wildfires have made their way to our region along with hot temperatures. Jeanette Rocher is back with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, we not only have that heat warning from Environment Canada, but also a special air quality statement due to the smoky conditions. How bad is the air quality right now?
Well, Environment Canada says that Lethbridge is sitting at a moderate to high risk, between a 5 and a 7. So we were at 5 earlier today, which is moderate, moving up to a 7 by Friday evening, which is getting to that high risk zone. So anyone with lung or heart conditions, breathing problems, maybe want to consider reschedule any outdoor strenuous activities until later on in the weekend or next week when this sort of clears up. But up until then, we got to deal with this sort of poor air quality. Looking into tomorrow, though, sunshine and 32 degrees. We could be seeing a 30-kilometer-per-hour wind gust up to 50K as well there. Sunday, lots of sunshine, 34 degrees. We're going to climb up to 37 on Monday, so it's going to be scorching. And as you did mention, we're also under a heat warning as well as that air quality statement. Mixed sun and cloud on Tuesday, high of 32, 33 on Wednesday and Thursday of next week with lots of sunshine. So definitely higher than those high averages of 26. We are shooting right up there into the 30s. Average low for this time of year, 11. 35 was our high temperature on this day back in 1970, and in 1999 we had our lowest day on record, which was 1 degree. 5:42 is when the sun rose this morning and sunset this evening, 9:33 p.m. Still lots of daylight out there as there's still lots of summer ahead of us. Over on the west coast, 30% chance of showers in both Victoria and Vancouver. Victoria is sitting at 20, 23 in Vancouver, 23 the high for Edmonton, 26 for Calgary. Both of those cities also sitting on a heat warning and an air quality control statement as well. Edmonton can be seeing a 40% chance of showers tomorrow and a risk of a thunderstorm. So a little bit of everything going on tomorrow in Alberta. Over in Saskatoon, also sitting at a heat warning. They also have that air quality statement with the fires burning in northern Saskatchewan as well. 33 the high there, 34 in Regina. Regina looking at a possibility of some thunderstorms tomorrow. Winnipeg sitting in the 30s there as well. Also a little bit hazy in Winnipeg tomorrow. Chance of showers tomorrow in Toronto, 23. Showers off and on in Ottawa tomorrow, 26 the high, 25 in Montreal under mainly cloudy skies. As we look further east into Atlantic Canada, Fredericton is going to be seeing a mix of sun and cloud, 26 the high there, 27 in Halifax. Halifax seeing some fog, some showers, and a possibility of a thunder shower. 26 the high in Charlottetown tomorrow, and 27 in St. John's, Newfoundland. Chance of showers there and windy as well. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather is brought to you, rain or shine, by the Gym in the North. Top-notch equipment and customized classes in Lethbridge's North End.
The province of Ontario is lifting more restrictions today as it entered stage 3 of its reopening plan. That means gyms, cinemas, theaters, and museums can now reopen, and restaurants can open for indoor dining once again. The province said if vaccination rates continue at their current pace, more remaining restrictions could be lifted 3 weeks from now. Home sales across Canada fell for the third straight month in June. Many markets have calmed down since sales hit a record high in March. The Canadian Real Estate Association says sales were down 8.4% last month over May as sales cooled in 80% of the country's markets. But it says sales still set a new record for June and were up 13.6% from a year earlier. CREA says the national average price of a home sold last month was just over $679,000. That is up almost 26% from June of 2020. Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says the seasonally adjusted annual rate of housing starts was down 1.5% in June from May. The National Housing Agency says the annual pace of construction for single detached urban homes fell 8.5%. That was partially offset by a 0.6% increase in starts for condos and other types of multiple unit housing projects. CMHC says the 6-month average of monthly seasonally adjusted annual starts was up 3% last month as the level of activity remains elevated by historical standards. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 198 points on the day to finish at 19,986. The Dow was down 299 points to 34,688. The S&P 500 was down 32 points to 4327. And the Nasdaq was down 115 points on the day to 14,427. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 20 cents to 71.45 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 7 cents to 368 US. Gold was down 17.42 to 18.1205 US an ounce, and silver was down 68 cents to 25.66 US an ounce. Wheat is at $410 per metric ton, barley's at $405, canola's at $9.16, and corn is at $405 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 95 cents to $120.18. Feeder cattle were down $1.75 to $155.63, and lean hogs were up $1.35 to $105.65. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 79.28 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Whoop Up Days is back. The Lethbridge Summer Festival will be a go September 2nd through the 5th at Exhibition Park. Admission and parking will be free this year. The legendary Whoop Up Days parade, however, will return in 2022. Coming up, an exclusive one-on-one interview with a victim of the 60s scoop and a residential school survivor who gave her life to Christ. Watch the informative interview with Deborah Manous in just a moment. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Looking for some summer fun and faith-filled adventures for your kids? Park Meadows Baptist Church presents Treasured Vacation Bible School, taking place July 26th to the 30th from 9 to 11:30 a.m. each day. Your kids will embark on an epic quest through hidden ruins and ancient caves to discover that they are God's greatest treasure. Cost is $10 per child and open to kids ages 4 to 11. For more information and to register, visit parkmeadowschurch.ca. The Southern Alberta Ethnic Association is excited to present Latin Fest on Saturday, July 17th from noon to 7 p.m. at the Multicultural Center. Experience Latin flavors, culture, and fun. Enjoy delicious food, dancing, music, and so much more. Admission is free with food and beverages available for purchase. For more information, visit saea.ca or call 403-320-1577. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Canada has been on the edge since the discovery of more than 1,000 unmarked graves at former residential schools across Western Canada. Residential schools that were once run by various church groups, including the Catholic, Anglican, and United Churches. So many Indigenous kids taken away from their families, never to be seen or heard from ever again. So how do we, as a country, are we able to restore relations with our Indigenous peoples as we work towards reconciliation? Deborah Manous has some thoughts on this. She's a First Nations woman who also gave her life to Christ and is now a pastor. She's also president of the Shekinah Aboriginal Society. Deborah, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Hal. I'm glad to be here with you.
Now, Deborah, in light of everything that's transpired with the discovery of the unmarked graves near the sites of former residential schools, and now some of the attacks on churches, including churches that were burnt down to the ground, where do we go from here?
Well, that's a very interesting and important question, Hal. One of the things that we have been finding is that, with the attacks on the churches, we believe that, a lot of this is happening to create something else within this nation that, it's not all has anything to even do with the First Nations burning the churches. So we have to be very, very careful about, who we're saying is doing that. From the First Nations, Métis and Inuit survivors, which I speak to quite often, they want to move on. They don't want to focus so much on what has happened to them. And their heart is for healing and restoration to the people. And that, I think, is very important, as a message from them in where to go from here.
Explain how you felt when news first broke of 215 unmarked graves first discovered at the former residential school in Kamloops, BC.
Well, a lot of the First Nations were not surprised because we have heard for many, many years from the survivors that there were, unmarked graves at the residential school sites. I had been researching this ever since 1979, and it was not a shock. Some folks, it was, with the younger generation, it was because a lot of these were not spoken about.
Now, do we know for absolute certain that it's just the children that are in these unmarked graves, or maybe there's some settlers or maybe some administrative staff? Way back when, do we know for certain who is buried in these unmarked graves?
Well, they haven't actually known. They don't know exactly who all is in there yet. This is why it's so important, crucial that we know from the churches that are in those areas that had taken the children, because a lot of the churches kept the records, of course, that those churches remain intact. It's very important because we want to know who is in there. There could potentially be, workers, or could potentially be, the caretakers of the children, because there were various, epidemics. There were smallpox, there was, scarlet fever. In that time, there was no, inoculation. There was no, vaccination for a lot of these things that we have now. So, that's very, very key in it. And I was reading an article not too long ago from Indigenous historical site that was stating this, and that it wasn't all children that had died from abuse, but there were other reasons for it as well, because the poor state of the residential schools, the way that they were made during that time in the 40s and 50s, there wasn't good insulation. Some of the children died from, TB, colds, things like that they didn't have, in shots for, basically, right?
Right. Now, Deborah, you were actually a victim of the 60s scoop. You survived being in a residential school and suffered abuse at a very young age. How did some of those experiences really shape you?
Well, I had PTSD for many years in my life. And my older brother, he had suffered with scarring of the heart, because there were times that we had, different, problems with our health, and we were not taken for medical care. We were not properly looked after that way. My brother at one time, he had whooping cough, as well as myself had pneumonia, and we weren't even taken to the hospital. So that affects your heart, affects your lungs, there's scarring, whatnot, and different situations that affected us physically as well as emotionally and mentally. And it was through years and years of counseling that, and also prayer, that had a powerful impact in my life in bringing healing and restoration to me and my family.
Amen to that. Deborah, should Canadians be more outraged as to what transpired during the 60s scoop and with our residential schools?
Well, we recently did a prayer Zoom call, and we had residential school survivors on there, as well as 60 scoop survivors sharing their stories. And we had also, other brothers and sisters on there, Canadian folks that were part of the call. And when they talked to me afterwards, they messaged me and said, we were shocked to learn of all of these things that happened to the First Nations people. We didn't know how bad it was, how it affected the kids when they were small. And, it really made an impact on the people that were listening, on all of us. And, at the end, the residential school survivors, they prayed for healing to come and restoration, and really believing, that it is the, it was a little God that was portrayed to the children in the residential schools, not the big G, not Christ Jesus that, came and restored and healed so many of us. And many of the folks that were on the call were First Nations ministers and intercessors that had healed from all this. So it is an eye opener. It is definitely an eye opener. It caused a lot of emotion, even with the folks that were on the call. And I think it's really good for us to understand, when something like this happens. Like for myself, I learned so much from the Jewish people when the Holocaust had happened. And that's very important for us to know, the history of a nation.
I have to admit, I was never taught about the 60s scoop or residential schools back when I was in school. Instead, we learned about Louis Riel, the rebellion, the FLQ crisis. Do you feel that perhaps residential schools should be part of the school curriculum today?
Yes, it's very important. I've been teaching my grandchildren. I have 14 grandchildren. I've been teaching them as well as the 60s scoop. I've traveled to many, many communities and churches in the last year and a half talking about my book. It's called Scooped, A Stolen Generation. And in there, when I talk about the 60s scoop, I asked the folks in the audience, have anyone ever heard of? They knew about the residential schools, but they didn't know about the 60s scoop. So yes, I believe it's very important that we educate ourselves and our children about it. It's part of our history.
Absolutely. Now, the former residential schools were not only run by the Catholic Church, but were eventually taken over by the federal government, and former Liberal Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau and his Indian Affairs Minister was Jean Chrétien, who went on to become Prime Minister. Should Canadians be outraged at the Liberal Party today?
Well, that's an interesting question. And what I would say is that, there is so much being focused on the church. And there was, within the Constitution and in the Indian Act at the time that they made up, that they were to go after the children and take them away from the homes. Now, this was all drawn up by the Canadian government. It wasn't made up by the church. So I really believe that, there needs to be more responsibility taken by the Canadian government, that the Canadian government needs to address it and to do some, things to bring justice to these residential school survivors and their families, because it has caused intergenerational trauma upon our people, of course, going into the 60s scoop as well. So I definitely feel that the government needs to, really look at their part that they played in this. And of course, right now we have the Liberal Party that's, that's there, that is in power, and they need to, do more than an apology, and repentance is doing the opposite and making amends, as we know in the Word of God.
Well, the Trudeau Liberal Party also recently announced that Mary Simon is our new Governor General, a woman who dedicated her life and her career to reshaping Indigenous policy. Do you think the Simon appointment will really help towards reconciliation?
I believe that it has a potential to, that if she is addressing, the situation within the First Nations communities. There are so many different things that are affecting First Nations right now. And this being, right at the forefront right now, it is, I believe, very key to have First Nations leaders all across the board in this nation. We, the first time in history ever having in the Assembly of First Nations a woman chief as well as some other First Nations women coming into power with, being Grand Chiefs. So, and we have one in Alberta as well. So I think that is progress that's huge, that this is happening. And I believe that this will be, something to really watch for, that there may be some, awesome things come out of it for our people and for Canada.
And what would be awesome as well is to have more clean drinking water on a lot of the reserves across the country, which again, something that the Liberal government says they're trying to aim towards. Deborah, please share how you came to know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior.
Well, when I was 15 years old, after being in foster homes for several years, I ran away from the homes and went back to my native community in Culling Lake, which is 130 miles north of Alberta. And during that time, I met Christ. I had gone into this small little cabin, wood cabin, and my cousin, which I didn't know he was related to me at the time, he was preaching in there. And long story short, that night, revival hit my community. There was almost 40 First Nations youth from my community. They're all my cousins. They came to Christ that night. I was the first of many. And Culling Lake was one of the worst communities in Western Canada at the time. This was in 1979 for murder and suicide rate, the highest in Western Canada. And God came there and suddenly, in one night, turned it around for Christ. And many of the elders prayed before their faces and fasted for 9 months straight, believing that God could do something that nobody else could do. And it did. It was a miracle. And so that's how I came to the Lord. That's when I was 15 years old, and I'm almost 60 now.
Wow. So what are the similarities then between what many Indigenous people believe about the Creator versus what Christians believe about God?
Well, there are some similarities. I would say in honoring, their elders, honoring leadership, honoring their chiefs, putting, family first. Those are, a lot of the things that we teach, according to the Word of God. But, in relation to, I would say, knowing Christ as their personal Savior, that's something that we as ministers need to teach our people still. Because when I came to Christ, it wasn't anyone that told me I had to let go of my old ways where I was praying to, ancestral spirits as well as, animals. Those things are, it's idolatry. So that is very different than the Christian faith. And when God, came into my life, I was powerfully healed and transformed and delivered as well from those ideas as I read the Word of God, and my mind was transformed by the renewing of my, of reading the Word, right?
That's beautiful.
So there is a difference.
Deborah, we've only got a moment left here. Tell me about this big prayer rally that's coming up July 24th involving elders and survivors of the residential schools and the 60s Scoop.
Yes, okay. Well, it's on July 24th at West Meadows Baptist Church, and they've generously donated their facility, and we've invited other church leaders all across Alberta to come, and we have chiefs, elders, residential school survivors, 60 Scoop survivors and their families, and we're going to be praying for almost 4 hours and doing worship in between the prayer times and believing for God to reach our people across this nation, to reach the First Nations. And, we did a couple of these calls online, and it was such a powerful time. We felt the presence of God. It was really eye-opening, as I said, when the residential school survivors shared their stories. But then, the rest of the brothers and sisters came and gave apology and repentance prayers, and it just hit everybody in such an incredible way. And the unity, you could feel it. It was so tangible, and it affected us for days after. And we said we'll do it live this time in person. So yeah, we're excited. It's at 6 p.m. and folks are welcome to attend. It's a peaceful prayer rally to pray for healing and restoration for the First Nations as well as Canada.
Deborah Manous, pastor, advocate, and president of Shekinah Aboriginal Society, thanks so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Hal. God bless you.
Well, it's been a very hot summer, making it a challenge to stay cool, but this is especially true for our senior population. We're joined today by Dr. Mila Luchak, who's a medical officer of health with the South Zone of Alberta Health Services. Welcome to Bridge City News, Dr. Luchak. So great to have you on today.
Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Now, of course, one of the challenges our seniors are facing is heat stroke or heat exhaustion. Can you first of all share with us what the symptoms of heat stroke are? What would a person, how would somebody know that they could possibly be in trouble?
Heat stroke is one of the more severe forms of heat-related illness. Heat-related illness has a number of symptoms that people should watch for, and it may range from having a heat rash to heat cramps in the muscles, or even swollen hands and feet. But that could progress to something called heat exhaustion or heat stroke. And heat exhaustion would be where someone may be sweating profusely, they may have some nausea or vomiting. But when it gets to something as far as heat stroke, that would be a medical emergency. Wow. And that would be when someone has a core body temperature of at least 40 degrees Celsius or higher. And they may have confusion, they may have altered level of consciousness, they may report feeling quite faint as well. So those are some symptoms to watch out for in other individuals and make sure that, is this something that's related to heat and is it actually heat stroke?
Yeah, definitely. So if you notice these symptoms in someone, what's the appropriate treatment?
If you're really concerned about someone and you think that they may have heat stroke, it's really important to make sure that you call for medical attention as soon as possible. And while waiting for medical attention, it's important to make sure that that person is removed from that hot environment, whether it's going inside or finding some sort of shade somewhere. Can also try to find a wet or damp towel that you can place around the individual and remove any sort of tight clothing that may be constricting them. And trying to also offer water if they're actually able to be drinking water at that point. So it's really important to make sure that you really understand what those signs and symptoms are of heat stroke and then what to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, we know that seniors and also youngsters are at a higher risk, but we're also told that there are other factors that could increase the risk as well, like obesity and heart disease or even some medications.
Absolutely. There are a number of chronic medical conditions that can make heat-related illness worse. And so that could pertain to diabetes, obesity, even various chronic mental health conditions as well. And when we talk about seniors, there are actually some changes in the body that do sort of increase that risk of heat-related illness, and that relates to a decreased sense of thirst, for example. So individuals may not know that they're thirsty and drinking adequate amounts of water. They also have the decreased ability to sweat, which is really one important way of trying to get rid of all of that heat. And then also the medications that seniors may be on also could make heat-related illness symptoms worse. And a lot of that has to do with some of those chronic medical conditions, as well as some of the reasons why we can't really get rid of the heat and trying to sweat and make sure that we're actually regulating our temperature in the body. Lastly, I would mention that it's really important to make sure that another risk factor would be that seniors may be alone. They may not have somebody at home with them. So it's really important to check on them as well.
Yeah, it definitely. Absolutely. Now, you, of course, mentioned fluids a number of times in there, water and stuff. So let's talk preventative measures. We're, of course, supposed to drink lots of fluids, but apparently there are some fluids that aren't necessarily that helpful. What are they?
That's right. So water is preferable, but I would suggest that fluids containing caffeine as well as alcohol would not be preferable because it can actually lead to more dehydration.
Yeah, so maybe not a good idea to sit out on the deck and have that glass of wine or glass of beer, even though it sounds like a great idea in the hot sun, but it can actually make the situation worse a little bit, can't it?
That's right. Yeah. So just being cognizant, water is really the best thing to stay hydrated with.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you, of course, had mentioned checking in on our seniors. So how important is it to do that? I mean, a lot of them do live alone. How often should they be checked in on, and who should be doing that if they don't have family members around them?
That's a really good point. And so it's really important to do frequent visits for seniors in the community. So it may be a relative, but as you mentioned, maybe there are individuals that don't have relatives close by. So if you know of a neighbor who's elderly, or over the age of 65 and they have many conditions, and you just want to check in on them. I think it's important to check on them even daily during these times when our temperatures are so high on a daily. And right now, it seems like even on a weekly basis, we have really high elevated temperatures. So checking whether it's in person or even just having a phone call, if that's all that you're able to manage at this point, just to check on that individual and make sure that they're doing okay.
Yeah, or so maybe like a neighbor possibly. If you know that you have an elderly neighbor, just be vigilant about that and cognizant.
Exactly. Yeah. It's important to look out for each other.
Yeah. Okay. So if you are outside during a hot spell, how much of a difference is it to wear lighter clothing, or even like what lighter colored or ventilated clothing, like hats that are ventilated? Can that help a little bit?
Yeah, all of those things are very helpful. So making sure, as you mentioned, wearing lighter colored clothing, more loose fitting. Also regarding hats, make sure that it has a nice broad brim on it, which really tries to eliminate the sun from shining on the face and on the back. Also, I might add to the wardrobe, making sure that the eye protection is there as well from the sun. So part of it is keeping an individual cool, but also making sure that there's that protection from the sun that can also really add to that heat related illness.
Now, of course, if you're inside, putting on the air conditioning is great, but a lot of people don't have AC. So what are some other things that they can do in their house to keep cool?
Absolutely. So it's great to have AC, but not everybody has access to AC. And so in the house, it's really important. A few things that you could do. So trying to draw the shades or blinds and making sure that you're reducing sun from entering the home during the day. Also, the use of fans are also quite helpful. At nighttime, it's also useful to open up the windows and have a couple of windows in the house that creates more of a cross breeze. So that would be more useful at nighttime when those temperatures are a little bit lower. And then also just thinking about maybe not turning on the oven or the stove for long periods of time during the day, just to make sure that you minimize the heat in the house.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Now, some people say that it could be helpful for elderly people to maybe take a cold bath for a period of time to cool down that body temperature. Is this something that could help?
So that's one strategy that could be useful for seniors, providing that it's safe for them to take a cold bath or a cold shower. Another way could be to use a cold towel or a damp cloth that they could use as well, just to put on their skin. Just another mechanism of reducing that heat. Another thing, if there's really no strategies at home and they don't have AC, it may also be a good idea to go to an environment where there is AC, whether it's a shopping mall or a community center or a public place where they can take a little bit of a break or reprieve from the heat during the day. That's just another strategy.
Yeah, definitely. Now, we've been talking a lot about seniors, but we can also turn our attention to youngsters, toddlers. So too often we hear these tragic, horrible stories of a toddler being left alone in a hot car. When the temperature is 25 degrees outside, it doesn't take long for that temperature to get so much even hotter than that inside the vehicle. Sometimes it can get twice that hot, doesn't it?
Yes, it's really important to make sure that pets, as well as young children, and really anybody, should not be left in a hot vehicle for any periods of time, just because of that ability for the temperature to significantly increase in a short period of time, especially during these warm days.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, what about sunburn issues? This is also a risk for everybody, all age groups. So when it comes to sunscreen, is there really much of a difference between SPF 30 and SPF 50, or is this just a marketing thing?
In terms of sunscreen, it's important to make sure that it has at least SPF 30 in it. But what's also important is that it covers the spectrum of UVA and UVB, and that also people pay attention to apply sunscreen. So reading the label about how often to apply it. For example, if you're going to go swimming or if you're sweating quite a bit on that day, making sure that you reapply quite often. And that would be really important in terms of sun protection. And also, even in addition to the sunscreen, making sure that you eliminate being outside in those peak hours when the sunlight is strongest. So that's usually between 10 a.m. and about 4 p.m. So maybe, rescheduling activities indoors during that period of time. And also, like we talked about, the clothing, so wide brimmed hat, wearing eye protection as well, and the clothing as well, just to protect from the sun.
Mm-hmm. How much of a risk is there of developing skin cancers with too much sun exposure? Is there a significant risk for lighter skinned people, or is that a fallacy?
So really, every individual is at risk for developing skin cancer with prolonged sun exposure. Sun exposure just is a major risk factor for developing some of these types of skin cancers. And there are some people that are more at risk, but I would say that it's really important for everybody to think about sun protection, because we all do have that as a risk factor in our life, especially with the sunlight and heat these days.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a real hot one this year, hasn't it been?
Absolutely. Yes, it has been.
Thank you so much for your time and expertise today, Dr. Luchek. We really appreciate having you on.
Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Dr. Mila Luchek is a medical officer of health with the South Zone of Alberta Health Services. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.